All right, welcome to part 4 of this SvelteKit tutorial. We are going to be talking about how to make calls to the Pokemon API to get data relevant to specific Pokemon. This is a great part of the tutorial because it shows you how you can use external APIs alongside a service like Supabase. So it might seem like a lot going on at once, but there's a bunch of really great learning happening in this tutorial. So the Poke API is a way to get a bunch of free Pokemon data where you don't even need an API key. You can just go to a certain link and it's going to give you all the data for a certain Pokemon. Inside of our SvelteKit application, I'm going to create something in the lib folder right here called Pokemon API.ts. And I'm going to create some helper functions, which just means it makes it easier to access the Pokemon API. And so these are just simple functions which are going to manage the actual API requests. And then inside of our Svelte part, it's going to be super simple requests just using these functions we're going to make here. At the very top here, I'm going to say const Pokemon _ API. So the link to the API is equal to https://pokeapi.co/API/v2. And guys, very important, make sure this last slash. If you miss this last slash, your requests will not work, just so you know. And so we're going to have two parts of the functionality. The first one is going to be get Pokemon list, which is going to get the first 151 Pokemon names. And so 151 is the first original Pokemon before they started adding on a bunch more. And so it's like the Pikachu, Charizard, stuff like that is what we're going to be using for this tutorial. And then also get Pokemon, which is going to be given a string, let's say Pikachu, get the information. And it's going to give us a crazy object with all this different Pikachu data inside of it. And these requests are actually really simple because they're simply just get requests, kind of like if you were to grab google.com as a get request. You just go to Google, it gives you the information. And so the first one is going to be export async function, get Pokemon list. And this is going to be an await fetch. The Pokemon API is the beginning of our link. And then at the end of the link, we want to say Pokemon ? Which means we're now adding variables to our request. Limit is equal to 151 and offset is equal to 0. We can actually go over to the Poke API real quick and we can even put it in right here. So try out this request, press submit. It's going to give us all the different names of each Pokemon, which is what we're going to have the user be able to select from. And so we're going to say const response is equal to this request. And then the const data is going to be equal to await response.json. So kind of waiting for this response to be fulfilled. Then we're going to turn it into a JSON format. And once it's finally a JSON format, we're going to return a data.results, which if you guys saw in the previous thing, when we were looking at Poke API, it's just going to be a bunch of objects with name, Pikachu, and it's going to go on forever with all these different objects. But these objects only give you the name and they don't have a bunch of information for each Pokemon. So if we want Pokemon information, we can do another one down here and we can say export async function, get Pokemon. And I'm going to say the name is going to be a string, for example, Pikachu. And we can even just copy our little structure from up here. But instead, we are going to be calling the Pokemon / name. So it'd be like Pokemon / Pikachu. And I will say this again, make sure to have your slashes on the end here. If you miss a slash like this, it's going to be no good. The request is going to fail. So you want to make sure you have your slash right there. Exact same thing. We're going to await the response.json. And this one, we are just going to return data. And once again, we can go to the Poke API and see what this is doing. So I can say Pokemon / I got Bulbasaur here, press submit. And it's just going to give us a direct object of all this type of data. So to keep the tutorial simple, I only show a couple pieces of data, but you get access to all of this. So you guys can make your Pokemon cards as cool as you want them to look because you get a bunch of data to show off here. But these functions are really helpful because now inside of our SvelteKit application, we can just say something like get Pokemon and it's going to return us the object. It's almost like magic. So we can go over to the email route. So where we have the data of a specific user. And we can even do something called page.subscribe. This means that whenever the route changes, we want to run a callback function. I'm going to make this asynchronous because we're going to have API calls inside of here. And the first one I'm going to do is I'm going to say await get Pokemon list from our lib/Pokemon API. Also, this $sign is a way to access certain kind of predefined things from SvelteKit. So you'll see it a lot for $lib or $app. It's just kind of where your SvelteKit functionality lives. And so get Pokemon list is going to return an array of data. I'm going to define some variables above here. So I'm going to say let Pokemon list is equal to an empty array, which I'm just going to type to any to make our lives simpler. And so then Pokemon list is going to be equal to await get Pokemon list. Once that's done, we can then console.log its value. And because page changes when we load our actual page, for example, if I load a new value into page, like just loading a website, like this one right here, it's then going to run the subscribe. And if I ever change the link to Cooper Codes 1, it's going to rerun and get Cooper Codes 1's data. But right now, we're going to be able to see this console.log when we load our website. So let's try it out. Well, see guys, I wasn't messing around. We have 151 things inside of here. And these requests are surprisingly efficient because it might seem like a lot, but these objects on the inside are really small. And so we have all of our different kind of Pokemon to choose from here, which is really cool. And we're also storing it inside of this Pokemon list so we can reference it later, which is also really cool. One thing we have to do is I'm going to create a let profile object, which is going to be typed to any, and it's going to be an object to store whatever you want inside of your user's profile. For example, it's going to have a description, which is going to say, this is your description. Feel free to write about yourself or your favorite Pokemon. And then we're also going to have a list of the Pokemon IDs that a user has chosen is how we're going to manage that. So Pokemon underscore IDs is going to be equal to 1, 2, 3, like that. This is kind of just some setup for the next part of the tutorial, but I put it here because these Pokemon IDs are going to reference the IDs in this Pokemon list. One last thing to show here is if we want to do await get Pokemon and just manually type in the name, for example, Pikachu, I can then console.log that directly like this. I can press save, and you'll see that's doing the request in the background to get all the different information about Pikachu. And I'm kind of giving a hint to the next part of this tutorial, but check this out. This sprites inside of here has a bunch of links that we can click on. And these links are the images we're going to be using for our Pokemon. And so that's kind of where the images are coming from, just to explain that part. And so to do all these await get Pokemon Pikachu, one thing we're going to do is we are going to load all the Pokemon IDs of a certain profile. And so I'm going to store all these different objects in a let Pokemon data type to any be equal to an array. This is eventually just going to be an array with 3 Pokemon objects like this with all the different data. So like Pikachu, Bulbasaur, Charizard, something like that. And so we're actually going to create a function to load all these objects into this array. So I'm going to make that function right here, and it's going to be called async function refresh Pokemon data. And so this is a simple refresh we can use, kind of like refreshing a website, where whenever we run it, we're going to set Pokemon data equal to an empty array. And then we're going to go into the user's profile. So profile.pokemon underscore IDs. We can always assume this is an array. So we're going to say dot map is going to be equal to async, then the ID, which is going to be a number. We can close that up. One thing I forgot to mention here, which is super important, is this get Pokemon also allows us to pass in IDs. So it can be the ID or the name. So if we go over to the Poke API and say Pokemon/1, it's going to give us Bulbasaur. Pokemon/2 is going to give us the next thing, right? And so we can just pass in this ID as well into get Pokemon, just so you all know. Because right here, we're going to say, all right, take a certain ID the user has, say const data is equal to await get Pokemon of id.toString. So it becomes the string of 1, for example. I was running into issues where Pokemon data might be undefined. I wasn't quite sure of this, but just to make sure you guys don't run into issues, I'm going to say if Pokemon data is equal to undefined, say Pokemon data is equal to, so this is going to set Pokemon data equal to an initial array with just the first object. So this one's always just going to have one object inside. Pokemon data down here is going to be equal to ... Pokemon data, and then the data like this. This ... is called the spread property. And so let's say we have an array with 2 things, like this. It's going to be a little confusing, but let's just show this here, right? This kind of statement can be viewed as this, where Pokemon data is this array, and then the new object we want to add is this data right here. So this is data, and this entire thing is Pokemon data, right? Well, this doesn't quite look like an array, but if we do ... to this array right here, what it's doing is it's taking the objects out of this array, and then kind of and then taking away the ... And now you have 3 different objects in a row. And it's kind of common JavaScript syntax for this type of scenario. But that's going to update our Pokemon data with the right data there. And so in our page.subscribe, I'm also going to say await, refresh, Pokemon data like that. And we can even console.log the Pokemon data to see everything getting loaded in. Because this map is going through every single Pokemon ID, for example, 1, 2, 3, getting the data for the Pokemon, and then putting the object in the Pokemon data array. So boom, you can see right here, we have the 3 kind of Pokemon here. And so now that we actually have 3 different Pokemon being stored in Pokemon data, we can scroll down to our cards here. We only need 1 now. So we just have 1 Pokemon card, which is right here. And we can say, first of all, if Pokemon data is equal to undefined, then we want to show a very basic just loading. I'm not going to make it look very advanced. And I'm going to end this if statement over here. So if it's loading, show loading. Otherwise, show all the cards. But now what we can do is we can say an each statement, so each thing inside of the Pokemon data array as Pokemon is the object we're going to use. So it's going, this thing right here is each object in the array. Then we can end our /each. And so for each Pokemon, we want to do certain things. For example, we can get the Pokemon.name. We can also get the Pokemon.types of 0.type.name. I kind of am saving you guys the effort here a little bit, but if you look at the actual Pokemon object, you can get any property you really want from it. This is just a way to get the first type that a Pokemon is. And so we can see right now it's going through each object and it's grabbing Ivysaur, Venusaur, Bulbasaur. We aren't grabbing the image source yet, so let's go do that. And just to explain what's happening a little bit more, is if we look right here and we go into, let's say, sprites, and then front_default is what we're going to use, you can grab that by saying Pokemon, which is this object here, .sprites.front_default is how you do that. So we can do that for the image source because it just needs a link. So we can say Pokemon.sprites.front_default. So now we can save that. Boom, this is pretty cool. So now we have all the different Pokemon we wanted from that. And we can get rid of that ugly gray background that was just for testing. So you can go in here, get rid of BG gray. Boom. And so we're almost done here, guys. But just to show you guys, we can change one of these Pokemon IDs, then refresh the page, and it will actually show us a different Pokemon, which is so cool. It's kind of all being handled for us. All right, guys, so that was the kind of Pokemon section of this video. Now we're going to get into how to save all this to Supabase DB.